admired for many years as a writer and thinker, and somebody who has persistently pursued the truth in a particular context that I had a particular interest in. And just to give you a little bit of introduction to him first, Stephen is a professor of government at Patrick Henry College and research fellow at the Howard Centre for Family, Religion and Society and the Independent Institute. He's also a writer. He's written for countless leading journals and newspapers, and appeared on TV and radio all over the place. I first became aware of Stephen when his first book Taken into Custody came out. How many years ago was that, Stephen?
2007.
2007. And at that point, I've been writing about fatherhood and the difficulties men were facing for about a decade at that point. And it was the first real sort of affirmation from the wider world that I hadn't been completely deluded in the kind of things that I was intuitively pursuing in that area, partly from my own experience, partly from talking to other men, partly from writing and getting feedback, and trying to construct some kind of pattern. Because when I first wrote about this, I thought of it as really a kind of oversight, that what was happening to fathers in family courts and so on was really a breach of a fundamental human right that nobody had noticed, and that the people who had been agitating on all kinds of other human rights, particularly from a left-leaning perspective, as I had myself, had simply overlooked this. And I remember I've often said it, that my first response on encountering this was to kind of think, well, I better get back to my compadres and tell them what I've discovered, because they're going to be really interested to know about this and to know of this forgotten, overlooked territory of human rights. And so I ran back to my compadres and said, come quickly, you must see what's happening. And so they came, and I said, look what's happening, look what they're doing to these men and their children, look what they're doing. And I thought, now I can relax, but no, they kicked my head in. And they've been kicking it in ever since. And that drew my attention to my own stupidity, among other things, my own naivety. And then when I pieced this together, and there was really nothing to go on here in Ireland at the time, but reading Stephen's book, I did see the pattern in this particular context, that this was this was not an oversight, this was systematic, and there was a whole program which was being rolled out in front of this. This was the fundamental sine qua non of this ideology, that it first of all required to destroy fatherhood and fathers. And so that was my taking into custody, that was my gut feeling, and not least the fact that Stephen had the extraordinary generosity to refer to the fact that I had been writing about these things myself here in Ireland, and I didn't know that anybody was aware of that outside. Certainly those who were writing for, I thought, were anxious to keep it a secret. So last year then, when this book came out, The New Politics of Sex, I read it again, and I had similar feelings, but really more complex, because I've been aware of my own journey in this, and the fact that the intense hostility that I generated, and the reaction to that, and the necessity sometimes to equivocate, to pull back a little bit and before going on again, had caused me to, in a sense, almost doubt my own witness, to doubt my own experience. And when I read this book, I immediately had this sense, as I was reading it, very quickly into the book, that, everything I intuited, not everything I wrote, because I didn't write everything, because that was the nature of the process, I felt intimidated. I had to sparingly write about these things, even though to me it seemed to be the only thing worth writing about in all those years. If I had written, I was accused of writing about it all the time. I didn't. I wrote maybe one article every 6 months or 3 months. but I should have been writing about nothing else. I should have been writing about it every week or every day, because of the nature of the fundamental nature of the breaches that were taking place. And then when I read this book, the whole thing was like somebody had written the ending of the play. Somebody had explained the whole thing from the end, and it began to just it reverberated back to me. All of the intuitions that I had, everything that I had experienced, all fitted together. So that's why I think this is really an amazing book, because it tells us, you know, it's an amazing thing. I don't know if this is always true of stumbling on the knot of injustice, the knot of evil in a time, in a society. That the nature of the knot is that it is not noticed. The nature of the knot is that it is disregarded, that it is dismissed, that it is always the last thing that people have their attention drawn to, until it is too late, until the tyranny reaches a certain point, and then it becomes too late, in a sense, that you have then stretching out of you, ahead of you, maybe a decade or 2 decades of totalitarian tyranny. So Stephen Baskerville has done us the great service of describing this new reality, and so I won't invade his territory by trying to anticipate what he's going to say, but we'll, what I proposed to do for Stephen was to speak for some time, and then we'll have a little short conversation between ourselves, just to tease out whatever needs to be teased out, and then we'd like to open the discussion to the floor. So, ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Baskerville.
Thank you, John. I'd like to start out by thanking John Waters and whoever else it is that made this possible, this talk here. I guess the Iona Institute had a role in this. But anyway, I'm very grateful to be here in Ireland. And I might mention in one of John's introductory remarks that I had a somewhat similar odyssey. When I wrote the first book, Taken into Custody, it was about the narrower subject of the divorce industry and the treatment of parents, especially fathers, in the divorce courts. And I too had a similar kind of initial impulse to say this is something that must have been overlooked by my liberal left-wing civil libertarian champions, fellow champions. And all I needed to do was call attention to this, and of course they would mobilize to end the injustice. And when that didn't happen for me either, any more than it happened for John, I realized that this was something more systematic. This was something deeper. Something more was at work here. And as I wrote the book, the first book, Taken into Custody, and afterwards, I began to see other patterns. I saw the pattern that what was happening in divorce courts and to fathers was part of a pattern. The kind of the stubborn refusal to look at injustice, to see injustice, to pretend it wasn't there, to refuse to look at reality, to studiously look the other way in the face of rampant chicanery, unethical judicial and bureaucratic practices, and flagrant injustice. And I realized something larger was at work here. I began to see this happen. I saw parallels with accusations against students in universities, knowingly false rape accusations against students, and then against domestic violence accusations and other things as well. And more recent events like the Me Too events and the accusations against Harvey Weinstein and people like him and so forth kind of extended my belief that this is a larger pattern here of what's going on. So that was the reason for the second book. The second book, The New Politics of Sex, the current one, was to look at the larger pattern here of what's going on, and to see what was what the larger issues here were. And I'll get into that in just a moment. I think maybe the most appropriate way to start out my talk here in Dublin, in Ireland of all places, to give my talk a news hook, current events, is simply to point out the large picture that in light of the current referendum on abortion, that those of us who are advocating for the family and for the rights of parents and for the rights of children in the family are losing. We're losing on every front. The Irish referendum is only the latest. If you look at it, we are being engulfed by the sexual revolution in its many facets, and we have no effective response. We have no counter-offensive. There's a war going on, and only one side is showing up. It's not just the Irish referendum on abortion. It's not just